Right, good. Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for this opportunity. I'm feeling a little bit of a charlatan in that I am not in biosciences. I'm in aquatic biodiversity, but we are talking about responsible research and innovation and the lessons we learned on the the NUCLEUS project. Right, just to place us in your minds, we are based in South Africa in a small rural town called Grahamstown, and the NUCLEUS project was a project that the National Research Foundation was involved with, and the South African Agency for Science and Technology Advancement was actually the consortium partner on the project, with SAIAB, the South African Institute for Aquatic Biodiversity, being an implementation site. So I will tell you a little bit about SAIAB. I'll then go on to tell you a little bit about NUCLEUS, and then how we put together our conceptual framework, the action framework that we worked to as a case study, and then the learning that came from that. So when we talk about institutional context, or the context in which we find ourselves, you'll see that we fit within a much larger organization, similar, I suppose, in some ways to a department in a university context, but we are much broader than a single university. On the left-hand side, you'll see that we are part of the National Infrastructure Platforms section of the National Research Foundation in the biodiversity sector. And then on the right-hand side of your screen, you'll see that SASTA, in fact, is the third pillar of the National Research Foundation, engaged with science engagement and corporate relations. And in the middle of all of that are the support mechanisms that keep research in the national facilities as well as universities going through grants management and so on. So that's a very brief overview of our organizational fit. So our research focus is life in water, and from that little dot in the middle of the Eastern Cape province of South Africa, you can see how we branch out through our research and the platforms that we provide by engaging, by transforming the research cohort and the landscape within which we work, by innovation and through exploration. So there are many factors to our research of life in water, in both the marine environment and the freshwater system environment in South Africa. That is just a graphic. It is quite detailed, but it's just another way of saying what we do. But our platform provision has become the overriding drive of what we do, so that we can interact with many universities across South Africa and help provide infrastructure that otherwise they might not have access to. We run small coastal craft, which are much easier to maneuver in the coastal marine environment than large research vessels. And then we provide collections and specialist laboratories at our site in Grahamstown that bring scientists from all over the world and the country. And then we run transformation programs trying to develop the cohort of scientists, especially in marine science, to be far more representative of the country's demographic than has been the case in the past. So we were part of the NUCLEUS project as one of 10 international test sites. We were referred to as embedded nuclei. And the NUCLEUS project was an acronym standing for a new understanding of communication, learning and engagement in universities and scientific institutions. And many of the presentations today have spoken to the processes involved in change management and how one approaches change management. So there are a number of congruencies between the NUCLEUS project and STAR BIOS, which you will probably recognize. I've certainly recognized quite a few similarities as I've been listening to presentations today. So the conceptual framework for NUCLEUS was firstly the metaphorical association of the nucleus and its cells, and the idea that the institute or the university is at the center of this interaction with various societal actors. You can see the spread of consortium partners, primarily in Europe, the UK, and across in Ireland, but also down in South Africa and in China. And a cultural adaptation study was actually undertaken in the first phase of this project to bring in examples that were outside of the European framework. So we had 10 embedded nuclei, of which the Chinese and South African nuclei were 2, and then 20 mobile nuclei, which were not embedded in institutions as such, but operated far more freely and did various engagement activities in their various areas. So we had a roadmap over the 4-year program. Where that arrow begins, the blue arrow at the bottom, is where SAIAB was brought into the program. So SASTA was a South African representative in the first phase of the project, where the roadmap going forward was being set, where the field trips were done, and where there was analysis of where and how this project needed to develop. So once this roadmap of the NUCLEUS project was put in place, then the idea was to go into an implementation phase, get action plans put together by each of the participant organizations, and try to work to what was termed a DNA of RRI. We also worked to an action framework. This was put in place to try and guide the activities of the embedded nuclei. And you could see we were given 8 actions against which to try and develop activities and report what we did. Certainly in the first phase of NUCLEUS, the context mapping and the policy and committee stage of NUCLEUS took place. As well as building institutional bridges. But these actions were scaled down to the level of the implementing institutes as well. So those were our actions, and we had to report against them. Not everybody could report within each of the actions. So you had to choose where you operated best and not feel that you had to give a full report on each of the actions. And I think that was something we learned along the way, that you can't do everything to an equal measure. So what we learned at SAIAB as an implementing institute and a case study was that RRI does not equal science engagement. And time again at shared platforms, we fell into this debate about what is RRI, and is the terminology actually useful for us, or is it more of a hindrance than a help? So there was quite a lot of debate in the actual project itself as to what we were trying to achieve. And a lot of people were reporting about science engagement and outreach and thinking it was responsible research and innovation. So that perhaps still needs some unpacking in this landscape. We also found that there was no need to reinvent the wheel, and I think this has been alluded to a couple of times. When you go into that self-reflective process, as Andrea was saying, you really do want to look at what you're doing and how you're already undertaking RRI. So that reflection is so important. And then adapting what you are doing to address specific challenges. We find a lot of time, if we ask our researchers to become involved in these things, they feel you're giving them extra work and they are resistant. So the thing is to try and show them how they're doing it already. If they are engaging with policymakers, etc., they are doing the very sorts of things that we're talking about. So there are just a few pointers: reflect, adapt, strategize. There you go into your planning and building the RRI into your governance and strategic planning. Aligning with organizational values, national imperatives and relevant SDGs. We've heard that before today as well. And then very important, telling the story, telling our story, illustrating RRI in practice, and telling that story again and again and again to reinforce it not only in the minds and hearts of the people you're working with, but also outside of that. Within the NUCLEUS project, the NUCLEUS project legacy, the lessons shared are to be had on the website, and I've given the link to the website. I'll share those in the chat as well after this presentation. And you can find out an awful lot of what came out of the various conferences we held and working groups and so on. But I think there are just a list of things that really are perhaps repeats of what has been said today. And if you go through them, you will look that they do tie in quite closely to the discussion document and the direction in which the Star BIOS project has also found itself going. And I must say those guidelines, Andrea, are very, very helpful, and I think a wonderful record of what has come out of Star BIOS. But I would like to stress that co-creation is very, very important. Flexibility is important. RRI does mean different things to different people, and I think that needs to be interrogated. And if at first you don't succeed, try and try again. And I think that's also, it's not an absolute. There will be successes and there will be failures along the way, and you can just learn from those. So I think my next slide is my final slide. Yes, so how are we going forward in LivingRRI? We constantly are asking the question, why do we do what we do? And so Simon Sinek's idea of the golden circle is a very useful tool to apply to setting the direction, interrogating where you are and what you're doing. And there are a couple of videos that are available that you can have a look at. I will share those links as well. They're also available, well, certainly the first one is available on the NUCLEUS website, and the second one, just a little introduction to SAIAB. And I'd just like to thank everybody I worked with on the NUCLEUS project, far too many to mention, but special mention to Anne Dijkstra from the University of Twente, with whom I co-authored a chapter in a book produced through the University of Stellenbosch entitled Science Communication in South Africa, Reflections on Current Issues, where we've tried to sum up some of the things that we discovered as a result of being on this project. So thank you very much for your time, and thank you, Anne, for taking over my presentation for me. Much appreciated.